Welcome back to another lesson on Windows PowerShell. Today I will cover hash tables. A hash table is an associative array or index array. In other words, values in a hash tables are added with a unique key, and each key has an associated value, and this is known as the key pair. Keys cannot be duplicated within a hash table, but you can modify the key values once the hash table is created. Hash tables are important in PowerShell because they are used to create custom objects, to pass parameters into commands, to create custom properties using select object term, and the type for values assigned to parameter values for many different commands and many other things that we do with PowerShell. In other words, like hash tables are already built into or baked into Windows PowerShell 7, and that is very useful when you are writing certain script. For example, if I use the command let get a dash command, and then I use the switch parameter, so parameter type, and if I go hash table, and if I run this code right here, it'll give you some information that already, like items that are already baked into or built into Windows PowerShell 7. So these are basically the commands that accept hash table parameter types that are already in the Windows PowerShell 7. So all of these commandlets would work with hash tables. So in other words, the hash tables are already baked into Windows PowerShell, and we can use that to our advantage by actually creating our own hash tables as well. So in this tutorial, I'm going to explore creating a hash table, selecting elements, and adding or removing elements from hash tables. To get started, I'm going to clear the screen here. This is just showing the information I got out by typing this command. It just shows the built-in hash table functions available to us. I'm just going to clear that screen. So I'm going to delete this part. And let's get into hash tables. So what makes a hash table different from an array list or an array is that it contains key pair values. So it always pairs, which allows you to access elements by using a key, by calling in the key instead of the position of that element. In fact, by default, the hash table elements are not ordered like it is in arrays and array lists. In other words, when you create a hash table, the values, the key pair values are not ordered in any particular order. It just basically random, it just do its thing and then put it into the hash table. So instead of calling in a position, which we use in arrays and array list in our previous lectures, in hash tables, to access the key pairs, you call in the key, which will give you the associated value for that key. To create an empty hash table, you do the similar thing as a array list. We will start with a $, and let's call this a test hash table. And if I put equal sign here with the @ symbol, and if I open and close the curly brackets, that will give me a hash table, and which is basically an empty hash table. And how do I know this is a hash table? We can actually call in that hash table and then go do get type. So with the get type function, if I run these two pieces of code, it should return hash table right here. So we know that this particular line of script created an empty hash table, because when we do the get type command, it returned as an hash table. It's very similar to creating an array list, right? Remember, if you want to create an array list, what we can do is we can create an array list called test array list, and if we go at, and that will return an array list. So in other words, it's very similar. The only difference here is this having a curly brackets versus this normal curve brackets. So if I actually cut this thing and I put it way up here, and if I type if I call in the function test the array test array list dot get type, and if I clear the screen here and if I run these pieces of code, this is a hash table because we have that curly brackets right here, it says hash table, and the other one is an array because we have the that regular the rounded brackets. So as opposed to using curly brackets, using rounded parentheses will give you a array. So just know those are like some similarities or differences between a hash table and an array list. Again, items in an array list are ordered, and the hash table items or elements are not ordered items. So elements are not ordered in a hash table, right? Little bit about that I will explain later, because there is a way that you can order your hash table, and I will show you that later. But by default, hash tables are not a type of thing in our PowerShell that are considered as ordered. So obviously you can create a hash table with specific keys and values already contained within it. For example, if I go let's call this my hash table. Let's call this my hash table 0. And if I put equal sign here with the @ symbol and with the curly brackets, not that one, this one, we can create keys and value pairs so that the hash table is not empty. For example, I can do key 1, and I will just call it value 1, comma, I can do key 2. Well, this shouldn't be a comma, this should be a that, and then we'll do key 2 equal value 2. This basically created a hash table with 2 keys in it, key 1 and key 2, with value 1 and value 2 strings in it. And again, sorry, I kind of misdid this in here. It should be, I mistype it. This should be a not a comma, but a semicolon. So that's how you separate values and keys pairs in hash tables. So if you, for example, if I want to add another key, I put a semicolon here and then put key 3, and I can say 55. So I have, it's a numeric value now. So you can have a hash table like this. And if you want to print this hash table, again I call in my hash table 0, and if I run these 2 pieces of code, it should print my hash table. So you have the keys and value pairs getting printed like this. So the reason why we also call a hash table, it's actually a table, right? It has a column of names and column of values. So we have a column of keys and column of values associated with it. So that's why we technically we call it a hash table. It makes sense, right? In your back of your mind, when you think about PowerShell hash tables, think of it as like a key value pair table. So you have keys and you have values associated with it, and you can put it into a table, and that's why we call it hash tables. So another way you can create a hash table, let's call this one my hash table with no zero or anything in it, and then we can put an equal sign. You can put an @symbol just like before, like above here. To make it easier for you and I, for human to read, I can actually start the curly bracket and end it, but then I can press enter. Notice that on Visual Studio Code with PowerShell addition in here, you can have that indentation automatically added here. As I mentioned previously with ArrayList, this is very useful when human has to read your code or script as opposed to a machine, right? So the machine doesn't care whether it's done this way or the method that I'm about to show you. It doesn't really matter. Machine doesn't care, but for human readable format, this is much easier. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to say key 1 and I'm going to say 2023. And remember, I need to have, I don't need to have this anymore. So I can put key 2. Then let's call this 2.15 and then do key, no, just call this name. I'm going to call this, let's call this Manuja. And let's add a Boolean value. I'm just going to call it Boolean so it's easy for us to, know what it is. So Boolean equal to $2, that's valid. We notice that the color of that true change as well because of our integrated scripting environment. Let's have a key that is actually not a string. So I'll put a number 1 value. So I will call this one number 1 int. So this is an integer. So if you are typing your hash table in a 1 line, you need to have this particular character between your keys. So the semicolon will separate your keys. If you are typing in hash table this way, your enter key in here will function as your pretty much the hash table's next key value. So now if I clear the screen below here, if I run this hash table and see what's in there, so type my hash table, and if I only run this piece of code, it will print the hash table here with the key value pair. And notice that the key value pairs are not ordered in the way that I have entered. That because remember, the hash tables are not ordered unlike the arrays. So when I call in this hash table right here, it just went in here and find all the key value pairs and just printed in a way that it is easier for PowerShell script to work. It doesn't really care, like there's no methodology or a method in why it's the key 1 is printed first as opposed to something else in here. So it does not have order built in by default. But at some point, PowerShell, the Microsoft Windows, they decided to add the ordering of hash tables into the PowerShell scripting. So in PowerShell 7, you do have the ability, and also some few other previous version of PowerShells, you do have the ability to actually order this. So if I want to order this, what I need to do is right after this equal sign, you can open up a square bracket and close a square bracket, and inside that square bracket, we're going to type ordered. And what that's going to do, it's going to force this hash table to be ordered in a way that it is typed in here. So if I reprint this, if I run that code, you will notice now the key 1, which I have entered at the very first in my hash table, is printed first here. Key 2 printed next. Name printed next. Boolean next. And the the number one key is printed last. So again, when you print the hash table at the beginning, when I print the hash table at the beginning right here, it printed in a random way because I ran the code with just my hash table this part. But when we ran the hash table code with this ordered item in here, so we put the square bracket at the front of this @ symbol and put ordered in there, it will print the hash table in the order in which that I have typed the key pair value into the hash table. Therefore, it will start from key 1, went all the way to 1 down here. So PowerShell does have the ability to order the hash table values. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, unlike an array or array list, elements contained within a hash table by default is not ordered. Because of that, even if you do have the ability to order your hash table, when you want to call in an element from a hash table, you will always use the keys. You don't call in the position like in arrays and array list in the previous lessons or tutorials. With hash tables, you call in the actual key. For example, if I want the value of 2.15, I will have to call in the key number 2. So keep that in mind. I'm going to clear the screen here. And I'm going to also delete the ordered here because that's the normal way of creating a hash table, by default way of creating a hash table. And next thing I'm going to talk about is how we can access these elements. So I mentioned, unlike a list or array list, you can call in the position. Like if I want 2.15 and call in, I can do that. So I need to be able to way to call in a element contained within a hash table. So you can access hash table data in few different ways, but one of the ways that you can do it, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, is using the keys. But let's say you don't know what keys contain within a hash table. Well, there is a dot notation keys. So if I enter my hash table name, so my hash table dot keys, what this is going to do, it will print out only the keys containing within this hash table without the value. So this is a useful thing. So if I run this, it will print 1 key 1 name boolean key 2, and these are the items contains within them. Notice again the order is gone now because by default the order, these are not ordered pairs, these are just random pairs pretty much. So I enter key 1 key 2 etc etc, and it actually in here key 1 key 2 boolean name 1, and these are the keys. So if you don't know how to access an element contained within a hash table because you don't know the keys, you can call in the keys. Now this is the most common way when you are writing a PowerShell script that you will access hash table elements. You will be calling or using hash table keys to access elements within a hash table rather than trying to figure out the values by the other way around. But the Microsoft have already thought about this. The engineers in Microsoft have already thought about this. So they also included us the option to check our values. So to do that, what you need to do is instead of keys, we can type values. And now if I run this part, what that's going to do, it's going to print the values contained within him. So it's not the keys, it's values. See, it printed 2023, 2.15, Manuja boolean value is true, and then the number 1 int, all of these things. So again, I'm going to clear the screen here. You have two ways to access what's contained within the hash table when you don't know how to access or what's in the hash table. One is the keys, and the other method is the values. And what those going to do is to print the keys and then the values contained within them. So you can take out the values and keys like that. Again, I'm going to emphasize this very important point. When you are working with PowerShell script, you will most likely going to use the keys. You are rarely going to use the values, but you can use the dot notation values right here. This is called a dot notation in most cases. And, to access just the values if you want to just get the values contained within a hash table. So there are situations sometimes you don't care about the key, you just need the values contained within them. You can get the values this way. Now think from a scripting point of view. Let's say you have already created a hash table and you know your keys, you know your values, or you don't know your values, you know your keys, right? Most scenarios that's the case. You know your keys but you don't know your values. Now you would like to access the values contained within this hash table. So how do you do that? Let's say I want to access this value. This value is a string value and it is Sanuja. You can do that with the dot notation again. To do that, what you need to do is just to put dot in here and type the key. So the key in here going to be name. And if I print this, what that's going to do, it's going to print Sanuja because the key name contained the string Sanuja. So this is called the dot notation, and that's a easy way to access a key. So again, access a value using a key, calling in a key, right? So for example, again, if I type my hash table, and then if let's say I want to get key 1, right? So I'm going to call in two things. I want to get the key name, the associated value, and the key 1 associated value. Now if I run this, it will return Sanuja, which is the name, and it will return the key 1, which is 2023. So this is called the dot notation, and it allows you to access the value associated with the key by calling in the key itself, and it will spit it out the value. Then it can be used in many operations in your script. Now another thing I want to point out here is that PowerShell is not case sensitive. So if I go, for example, if I type my hash table and dot, let's call this key 2. Remember, we have the K here capital, but in here K here is not capital. So let's see if that will return something in here, right? So if I run this now, it's still valid. So the name return name string Sanuja. The key 1 with a K capital return the same thing, the associated with the key 1, which is 2023, and it returned 2.15 for the key 2, even though the K is simple. So it doesn't really matter. I can type like NAME, for example, and if I clear this screen, and if I delete this too, so it's easy for you guys to see. So name here is type all simple, name here is type capital and simple. But if I call in this right now, it will print Sanuja, because in Windows PowerShell we don't care about capital or simple letters when you're dealing with hash tables. So that's something that you should know. And I'm going to just comment this out because I don't want to print that, but I want you to know that this is one of the way that you can call in. Another way you can call in or access an element or value contained within a hash table is using the square notation. So to do the square bracket notation, you start with your hash table name again. So it's my hash table for me, and then I'm going to start with my square bracket. So you have opening square bracket and closing square bracket, and because I have these keys right here, I can call in those keys. Like for example, I want the key name, and let's try something else too. My hash table, again I'm going to start with the square brackets, and I want to call in let's say key 1, right? Again, simple capital doesn't really matter. And I'm going to run this code and it will return Sanuja for my name and for key 1 2023. So that's another way. Instead of using this dot notation that I shown here, you can also call in by access your elements containing contained within the hash table by calling in the keys using this notation, the square bracket notation. Now, there is a reason why I have this particular one added here, where all of these are actually strings. So all of these keys are strings, but this key is not a string, and there is a reason for that. So let's clear the screen. There's a reason why I did that, to show you that you can have a hash table with a key that is not a string. That's one thing. So this could be a double. It doesn't really matter. I'm just putting an integer. And integer keys are valid keys. So the keys doesn't have to be strings like these. It can be an a integer or a double, for example. The only problem with this is that it may create an issue if you don't know that you are working with a such key. I will show you what I mean by that. So I'm gonna comment these ones out, so we don't run these things every single time the code is run. So comment out. So let's say I want to access this key, right? So I can go like my hash table. My hash table .1. So remember the dot notation, my hash table .1. And if I run this code, basically I'm running this part and this part, not the commented part. What that will return is number 1 int, because that's the string containing associated with this number 1 integer. That's a valid thing, right? Because remember, it's the same way as saying I want name right here, dot name or dot key 1, for example. So this is same notation as this and it works fine. That's no problem. But if you want to access this value and you use the square notation, so let's go the $, my hash table, start with the square notation. Now you need to remember that this is actually an integer, because if you go like this, this is gonna look for a string value called 1. Because these are all strings, they are perfectly fine that way. So this is perfectly fine because name is a string and it's just fine by putting in those quotation marks. But if you add those quotation marks in here, this is gonna spit it out an error message. I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I run this, I'm gonna comment this out again, this part. And so I'm gonna run my hash table and just this part, and it should spit out an error. I misspoke a little bit there actually. It won't actually spit out an error message because the PowerShell 7 will not throw out error messages when you're working with hash tables. And this is one of the things, one of the places that there won't be any error messages going to spit it out. And in next few seconds, I'll show you another example of why the error message is not going to show up. So if I comment this thing out, what this is going to do is not going to print the number 1 int. Instead of, it's not going to print anything. So if I print it out, see, it didn't do anything. So it went through the hash table, and these are just comments that I have up here, and it didn't actually print anything because the number 1 doesn't exist because it's a string. So you need to make sure that if you have an integer or a double, that you are calling in that integer or double key from your hash table as such. So if you call this thing as a string, it doesn't exist because that is not a string. So this is by default a string, but this is by default a numeric value. It's an integer, so it's gonna call in that part. So this is actually going to make you more confused, so I'm going to delete this part. So if I just run this, it will print the number one int. But if I put that with this as a string, because this number one is not a string, it will not print anything at all. So see, it doesn't print that number one int. It doesn't give you anything at all. This is basically the hash table itself. So that's why it's it doesn't print anything if you go about doing that. In other words, what I want to highlight here is that attempting to use a string to access a value key that is a integer is not going to work, because it needs to be called in as such so that it can go ahead and print that value associated with that key, which is the string number one int. So that's what I just want to highlight here. And this is important when you're working with script again, because otherwise you will be trying to troubleshoot your code and you don't know why your script is not working. So keep that in mind. So if you have a integer or a double, like it could be like 21, 12, for example, if you run this and this is let's say this is 12 int, and this is not an int, it's a double. So I'll just do that, and then if you run this, it'll print number 12. So that is a that is something important again when you are working with PowerShell hash table. So I'm going to clear the screen again. Oh, that's not where I need to type clear. I need to type clear on the terminal. Now you can actually check if this hash table contains a key. For example, I don't want to use the dot notation keys and get all the keys printed. Remember a few seconds ago, I showed you that you can print all the keys to your terminal, but I don't want this because I'm looking for a specific key. I just want to know if that key exists, right? This is good for for loops, while loops, if conditional statements when we start going through some intermediate and advanced PowerShell scripting. So how can I do that, right? I don't want to know every single key. I want to know if this specific key, let's say name exists, right? So how do I do that? You can check if a specific key that you are looking for contain within this hash table by typing in the hash table name, putting a dot, again dot notation, and we can use the contains key. And with this function, you can test if a key is there. For example, let's say I'm looking for a key called key 25, right? And again, it's not case sensitive, so it doesn't matter if I type key 25 like this way or this way. So let's run this. I want to know if this key exists. It's gonna spit it out a Boolean logic associated with this particular function, and it tells me that, hey, it's false, it doesn't exist. So let's try something that does exist, right? So I'm going to put the same command as this one. So I'm going to type my hash table dot contain key, and I'm going to say I want to know if the key name exists, because I'm writing a script and I'm looking for name key, whether it exists or not. So if I run this, so I'm looking for two keys now, key 25 and key name. And if I run it, it'll tell you, yes, it does not exist key 25, but it does have the name. So this applies to everything else too, right? I can keep going with, my hash table 0 that contain keys. And then I can put another key. For example, I want to know if the key 1 exists. Again, it's not case sensitive. I can just put key 1. And if I run, it should give me false, true, true. So I'm going to clear this. So this is going to come back as false because key 25 doesn't exist. This is going to come back as true. This is going to come back as true. And we can try another false. Let's try. So I'm just going to copy and paste it here. So I can try I'm gonna see number 212 exists as a key in here. So if I run this part of the code, it will return false, true, true, false. So this is true, yes. Sorry, this is false. No, it does not exist. Key 25 does not exist in this hash table. And in this particular key, the key name and key 1, they do exist, so it's true, true. And then the key 212 does not exist, so it will return back false. So this is useful when you are doing conditional logic, if statements, else statements, while loop, for loop conditions. You can use this to make sure that you don't run into any errors on your PowerShell script by calling in the contains key method or function. So that's a great way to check whether your PowerShell has that particular key. And speaking of changing key value pairs, or like checking the key value pairs, let's look at how you can actually add a key or update a key in your hash table. So let's say I really want to have a key 25 in this hash table. It is not in there. How can we add it, right? So let's check that out. So I'm going to clear the screen here. I'm going to delete this part as well, so just keep the code clean. So let's look at how we can do this, right? We need to be able to add to our hash table or modify the information or keys and value pair containing within them. To do that, again, you can start with your hash table name. So mine is that's not my hash table here, because I'm trying to interact with this hash table, my hash table. I'm going to type my hash table, whatever the hash table you call it. Now remember from our previous lessons or previous tutorials, with arrays and array list, we have this thing called add function or add method, right? So you can use dot add. So it is a add a method or function, and you can add that. You can enter that, and in here you can enter a key value pair. Now one thing you need to remember is that this particular add function or method, actually this add method has to take 2 parameters. The reason for that is we are interacting with a hash table. Hash table always have key value pair. So you can just have something like let's say key 3 and then nothing else after that, because this is not valid, because you just add a key with no values in it. So I mean you can run this, but it's it doesn't have a value associated with this key. So what you need to do is put a comma and put something else in it. So let's say test. So what this is going to do, it's going to run the code, create the hash table with this key value pair, and then go ahead and add that key 3 in here with the value test on it. So we can check that. So let's run this. Actually, let's call in the that key. So let's see if the key 3 going to get printed. So if I run this right now from top to here, it printed test. The reason for that is at the very beginning we didn't have key 3. It's not there, it's false. But when the PowerShell ran through my code, it took in this add method, and it added the key 3 with the specific string value of test in it, and that's how we end up getting that element or value from that key 3. So the key 3 didn't exist at the very beginning when the hash table was first created, but we added it down here, and when you call in the key 3, it printed test because now it is contained within them. Now this will only add if the key is not already there. For example, if I go ahead and type another line called my hash table and dot add, And this time I'm going to type again key 3. And then I'm going to put in here haha. It's a string, it doesn't really matter. Just like test, I just put haha. It could be like that too, it doesn't really matter. This should result in an error, and it will actually spit out an error message. And the reason for that is the key 3 already exists. It can add again. So I'm going to delete this line. So I'm going to clear this. So if I run this right now, oops, sorry, and like that, and if I run it, there you go. There is an error message right here. Because the key 3 is added right here as test, you can't re-add the key 3 as haha. It's going to give us an error message saying exception calling add, this adding of method have found 2 arguments, right? They've already been added. So the key 3 cannot be added again because the key 3 already exists. Now, you can overcome this. There are other ways you can add to your hash table that will modify this key 3. That includes what I'm about to show you next. What that's going to do is you're gonna recall the same thing, hashtable dot. Now instead of doing dot in here, sorry about that, I shouldn't have put the dot. What I will do is I'm going to use the square method. So now I'm going to say I want to change this key 3, and I want to change that to, let's say, haha. So this is what I want to do. I don't want key 3 to be this value anymore. I want key 3 to be that, right? So again, if I can go if I print my hash table dot key 3, and if I print the same key 3 down here, again it doesn't matter capital or simple, right? And if I run this piece of code, key 3 first be test, then the next it will be haha. So if I print it, the key 3, when I call in here, it printed as test, but it went through the next line and it changed the key 3 to haha. Now the key 3 is haha. So this method of adding elements, key value pairs to your hash table, not only can add, because like if I want to add key 5, for example, in here as haha, instead of modifying key 3, that would be fine too. Because if I run this now, it'll have not only key 3, but it'll also have key key 5 contained within them. So if I run this now, it'll have both key 5 and key 3, and as a result, it will not modify the key 3. So if for example, if I run that, so see, it's test. So key 3 did not get modified here. So this method of adding to your hash table, if it already has this key 3, if the key is already contained within the hash table, it will not let you add it again. This method, however, if it already has that key 3, right, it will modify that key 3 and append it. So that is the difference between adding this way or this way. Another way of adding to a hash table is again with the similar way that you're gonna get the hash table in here, and you can simply go instead of a square bracket, you can put a dot, and you can put key, and then you can say key 3 and then equal 2.15. And again, what this is also going to do is to override this key 3 value up here, that whatever we created, and it will replace it 2.15. So if I print key 3 couple of times, each time this gonna get print, it's gonna be a different item, different value. So again, I'm gonna explain my code here. We have the hash table here, there's no key 3. Then I add the key 3 with the value of test string in here. Then I change the key 3 to haha, a string. Then I change the key 3 again to a numeric value of 2.15. So when the key 3 get printed right here, it's gonna print basically the test. It's gonna print here, haha, it's gonna print here 2.15. So every time this code runs through, it add the key 3 here, but then it's keep changing because both this method using square bracket and this method using the dot notation will amend or append the key 3 value. So if I run this right now, printed test first. So the key 3 was test first. Then it printed haha. It's the same key 3. Now the value has been changed. And it printed 2.15 next time. So in other words, it keep appending or changing the value of key 3. The advantage of add method is that it will prevent you from adding or changing your key 3 when you don't want to you don't want to change anything in here. So do not change, let's say. So the other method advantages of the other method in here is that it will allow you to change the key value pairs while the key is already created in your hash table. So if I run here, it will give you an error message for the last code right here because it won't let you append or change this key 3 value because we are using that add function. So each of these items, whether you decide to add key value pairs using the .add method, or whether you use the dot notation or the square bracket notation, it doesn't really matter. Choose the best one works for you. But the dot notation, which is this one actually right here, the dot notation right here, delete this one. So the dot notation right here and this notation with the square bracket, the actual value of the key 3 that are already in the hash table will be modified. But this notation, it's going to create a brand new key called key 3. And if there is key 3 already in your hash table, it will spit out an error message. So those are different ways of adding to your hash table. Now, what if I want to delete from my hash table? So I don't like, let's say, my key 1. I want to completely get rid of the key 1. I can do that. To do that, I'm going to again call in my hash table and I'm going to put a dot here. Now we have a method called remove method. In remove method, however, unlike the add method, you don't need to give key value pair. It can only take just one. So I want the key 1 removed and I can run that. And if I remove that and if I print my hash table, that will remove that key 1. I'm just going to delete this part because these are the addition examples that I did. So I'm just going to delete that. So I just want to remove the key 1. So when I print the hash table here, the key 1 will be gone. So let's print my hash table. Let's run this code. So originally my hash table had key 1 2023 and I have key 2 name boolean 1. So that's running up here. But I remove the key 1. Now my hash table doesn't have the key 1. See the table gone, the key 1 is gone. So that's how you can actually remove the key 1. You can also completely clear out your hash table as well. To clear out your entire hash table, you can use the clear clear method. So this clear method, again, in the clear method, you can completely clear everything without giving any parameters in here. And that will completely delete your hash table. So you originally created a hash table here, run it. So the original hash table had all of these key value pair. There is no hash table getting printed here because I have completely cleared out my hash table using the clear method command. So that's a way that's a method that you can use. These are a couple of method that you can use to either clear or delete your hash tables. So today we cover all the basic operations we can do with hash tables in Windows PowerShell. This is just an introduction to what you can do with hash tables, but I will go into some in-depth analysis and some complex scripts in the future. If you haven't watched my previous videos, please go back and watch my previous tutorials if you are new to PowerShell and you are learning the ropes of PowerShell. If you like these type of tutorials, please make sure to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, thank you so much and have a nice day.